thank you all for being here today, and I hope that you guys enjoy the presentation. And basically what I wanted to do was just, leave it pretty much open to whatever you guys wanted to talk about. And so the format is really pretty loose. Does anybody have anything you want to talk about or anything you want to ask me now?
How did you come up with the idea of tapping?
You're asking about the two-hand technique, right? Yeah, well, it's something that kind of developed through an evolution, because I went through a lot of different phases. Because originally, when I first started playing guitar, I played mostly with a pick, and I also did a lot of stuff on finger-picking style. And I played basically mostly pick style for about 6 years. And what happened was, at the same time, I was also playing piano. As a matter of fact, I was playing piano before I was playing guitar. About 6 years before I started guitar, I started studying classical piano. So that was really kind of my first performing or playing, background. And I got away from it for a while because I realized that I really preferred guitar. Guitar is really my axe. I mean, I feel the guitar more. I feel like the guitar expresses me more. But still, I missed a lot of the possibilities, the textural possibilities of the piano, being able to do the self-accompaniment and being able to play clusters, chords, which you can do to an extent with guitar, but it's kind of tricky, And, just a lot of the kind of voicing potentials of the piano. And so for a while, I was playing more piano than guitar. I started taking up the piano again when I was about 15. And I was playing lots and lots of piano, and I loved it. And I loved the fact that you could just throw your hands out on the keyboard, and wherever they land, you come up with a sound. And if you don't like it, you can adjust. You can deal with it. But it's all just spontaneous, and it's all music. So I wanted to have a similar kind of effect with the guitar. And I remember one day I imagined, sometimes you just think of weird stuff that just pops into your head. And I imagined what it would be like. And I sort of saw myself like dissociated, like there I was over there. And I saw myself, both of my hands were just flying up and down the guitar and crossing over and under. And all this music was just pouring out of the guitar. And I just thought, wow, wouldn't it be great to actually do that, And so that had been in my head. I remember that occurred to me when I was maybe 13 or so. So it was already kind of in my head. And then what I started to do is I started to think, well, I started to realize that I was getting frustrated because I couldn't make the music I wanted to make on my instrument of choice. And really, I think a lot of things that we develop in life come out of frustration, you know. Like we learn to talk because we can't get people to understand, you know. We learn to walk because we're just hanging out here on the floor, you know. We got to get up, you know. And it was a similar kind of thing. I got real frustrated, and so I decided if there's any possible way to do this music that I want to make on guitar, then I want to figure it out, because if I don't, then I'm really not going to be happy, you know. So I thought, okay, what can I do? And so at first, probably what I should do, let me demonstrate on the other guitar so I can sort of show you the evolution of how I came about the touch thing. Before I developed the two-hand technique, mostly I was playing pick and finger picking style. And this was some of the kind of stuff I used to play. And also I was doing finger picking stuff like this. Like I used to develop like independent rhythms with my finger picking stuff. Like I'd do stuff like, I'd say, well, what would it be like if I had like this rhythm going on this string and that rhythm going on that string? And so I'd do stuff like suppose I wanted this rhythm, and then on the other string I wanted, then I would go. You know, stuff like that, like experimenting with independent rhythms, and maybe I could add another like. So I'd get like, I sort of build that up and I keep adding more rhythms. The problem is that it's constrained. If I want to change one string, then I have to reorient my whole hand. I don't have the kind of independence, whereas like on keyboard, for example, you could have a whole thing going. If you just decided to move one note, you slide that one finger and all the other fingers can stay where they are because you don't have the same kind of dependencies as you do on guitar. So I started thinking, that was one thing that kind of led me to think, well, is there any way that I can reduce some of the dependencies that I have? And, well, obviously the keyboard concept where you have the two independent hands would do it. Another thing was that I was looking at a book that had, I think it was a David Baker book, because I used to read a lot of his books. He's one of my favorite pedagogical authors. And I was reading a thing that was talking about, it was a method of study for all players of all instruments. And he had a chapter on keyboard, and he had all these voicings. And I was checking out these voicings, and I was saying, man, I wish I could play all those voicings. And I realized that if I wasn't limited to one note per string, then I could play all those voicings. And so then I realized that actually that is one of the fundamental limitations that we have to deal with on guitar, is one note per string. I mean, there's things you can do. There's ways that you can play like the note and the harmonic at the same time and stuff out of one string, but it's real tricky and I'm not that good at that. But, and even then you still don't have the same kind of independence, you know. So I wanted to figure out a way to do that, and I thought, well, probably that instrument is going to be some kind of an electronic instrument that lets you play more than one note per string. It's going to be some kind of like a sort of fingerboard keyboard maybe it's physically like a keyboard, but logically like a guitar. So guitar players can play it, but you'd have that ability to play more than one note per string, and it would be some kind of a controller for synthesizer. I wasn't thinking MIDI, because this was before MIDI. This was like 1974 when I was thinking about this. And so I thought, yeah, what would be great is if you had like a matrix of push buttons, where you could just play on these push buttons, you know. And so then I realized, well, okay. And I started actually trying to develop that instrument, and I did a lot of experiments because I was really into electronics. And I used to build, I still have some of the prototypes of stuff I used to build in those days. And you know, I saved this stuff, but I never really got it working the way I wanted to. A lot of the limitation was money. I just didn't have the money. Like, I realized if I could just go out and buy like 416 buttons and put them on a board, then, you know, I mean, even things like that, but I didn't have the money to do that. So, you know, I'd build little prototypes and things, but what I decided was, well, since I can't do that yet, how closely can I approximate that on the guitar? And so really, the whole two-hand concept on guitar was kind of a stepping stone toward this other thing that I really wanted to do, which was the electronic instrument. And it just happened. It was kind of a fortuitous thing, because developing the two-hand technique on guitar turned out to be something that was worth doing in its own right. And so I've continued that, and I'm still, you know, trying to develop it. But on the other hand, I've seen little things that have come out where other people had the same idea with the matrix, the fingerboard matrix. As a matter of fact, I have one right here. This instrument is called the Zitar, made by the Star Switch Company. And I saw it advertised in a magazine, and I looked at it and I said, that's that instrument that I've been trying to develop for the last 20 years. And I knew. I called the guy up and I said, you know, I know what this thing is that you've made, and I want one. And I can sort of show you what you can do with this. I have it right now going into a Korg wave station. Okay, check this note out. It's going to an organ. I can now go like this, same string, because there's not really strings. It's an array of push buttons. So I can do all my two-hand stuff. Anyway, that was real sloppy, but you get the idea. And it's really a cool instrument. There's some other features down here which I'm barely beginning to even use, but for the most part, this is really what's happening with this. And so getting back to this, and I'm going to play this some more later, but getting back to this, I started thinking, well, how can I incorporate that idea into a guitar, or how closely can I approximate it? And I just started thinking, well, really what I'm after is the independence of the two hands. So I started doing things with my pick, like I would do stuff like, I'd play a chord here, and I'd fret a note up here. And I think I have a couple of Joe Pass records where he does that. I know he's doing that because I hear it and I say, wait a minute, how did he get way up there, you know? And he's doing this. So I started thinking, okay, well, I can fret and pick with the same hand. That's kind of a novel thing. The only limitation there is that I still have dependencies, because, for example, wherever I move this finger, that's where I'm going to pick. And, of course, where you pick on the string is really important, and that's one of the things that I was really developing. Like, there's one kind of sound there, or here. So you have different sounds depending on what you play, and you can't control that independently of the thing you're doing up here. The other thing is I started thinking, well, a pick is basically monophonic. I mean, you can strum and you can kind of hit a couple of notes and make it sound like they're both at the same time. But listen, I'm not playing those two notes at the same time. You know? So then I started thinking, well, actually the finger picking concept is cool because you do have a certain degree of independence. Like even like being able to do stuff like, you know, like, you know, stuff like that. But you still have a lot of dependencies there. And being able to do things like, okay, I can pluck with my thumb, and fret with my forefinger, or maybe these two, or maybe I said, well, okay, if you're fretting with these two, then you're plucking with these two. So how would you do that? I mean, it's been years since I even did this, because it's ridiculous, really. But this is the kind of stuff I was trying to do. And then I got so, you know, tied up, get my fingers all tied up, that I just said, wait a minute, why don't I just do this, you know? I mean, why can't I just do like this? Why can't I just play it, you know, just like the keyboard style? Well, of course, now I've been doing it for a long time, and so I'm a lot better at it than I was then. But I realized it's really not that easy. What is it about the guitar that makes it so difficult to just go like this? Like this one, see, it's really not set up for that, because listen to the sound. It's not that bright, sparkly sound with all the sustain like I get on these guitars. I mean, compare it to this. Well, part of it is also I have a problem with my tone control. It's not, tone control doesn't work, so that would help if the tone control worked. But still, just listening to the, it just doesn't, you hear, for example, you hear a lot of the sound of the finger hitting the string because of a low, sort of puffy, boomy kind of sound. It's not the bright kind of sound that I figured you could get. So I started thinking, well, what is it about guitar that makes it so hard to play that way? And that's when I started looking at the guitar differently, and that's when I started trying different experiments. I realized, well, if you can get your action down, then that will definitely help. I discovered that that definitely helped. Like that one over there has lower action. That's the main thing that makes that one brighter, other than the thing with this working. But it's that one, that guitar has lower action. And so I started lowering my action down, and then I started to get all these buzzes when I was lowering my action. So then I started thinking, well, what can I do to make it so it doesn't buzz? Because it's not buzzing everywhere, it's only buzzing here, it's not buzzing down there. How can I make it so, you know, this isn't buzzing either? And then I started realizing, I checked it out how, like when you fret here, and that fret sticking up a little higher, the string buzzes on the higher up frets. So it's really a kind of a question of filing the frets down. Okay. So I used to spend hours and hours filing my frets down. I mean, and I started thinking, well, wait a minute, you know, I originally set out to be a guitar player, you know, and now I'm basically really kind of developing into a carpenter or something else, because it just takes so long. And if I was a carpenter, I'd probably figure out a much more efficient way to do it, because I don't know anything about that kind of stuff. So anyway, I took it to various repair people, and I said, can you get my action down this low? And they said, no. You know, that's too low. You can't get a guitar down that low, they used to tell me. So I said, okay. So I went back home, you know, and eventually I got it to where I could get it down pretty low. And I realized that a lot of it was just kind of the technology of doing really super fret work so that you can get the action down really low. And so basically what I do now, what I advise people for that, is I tell them, set your action at the place where you want it to be, and then take it to somebody and tell them, listen, can you make this stop buzzing with my action like it is? And if they say no, then take it to somebody else. But if they can really do that for you, then that's, and I think that fret people are getting better. You know, you can sort of go down to your local music store, and it's more likely that you'll be able to find someone these days who can do really, really good fret work. There's a whole art to it. So if you find someone who does really good fret work, and you find that you'll also need to get fret work done more often, because the impact when you're hitting is going to wear down your frets more. Whereas when you're just holding it down, it doesn't wear it down as much. So you find it's not only is it more critical, but also you're wearing it down faster. So you will need to get more common fret jobs, and they have to be done really well. And but there's little tricks, you know, in the meantime. Like there's little things that I've developed, like all kinds of little tricks. Like for example, if I got at one place where I'm playing here, I don't think I have any right now, but if I have a place where I'm playing here and it's buzzing, and it's only at this fret that's buzzing, what I'll do is I'll take the string and I'll kind of rub the string on the fret so that I'm actually making a little groove in the string. So well, I don't have time to file down the fret, so I'll sort of file up the string right there, you know, and you know that kind of works for a while, but after a while the string doesn't sound so good. But you know, just to kind of get you through a gig, you can do stuff like that. But that's one of the most critical things. That's probably the single most important thing that I discovered for myself, was getting the action down. And also, if you get your pickup as close as possible to the strings, then that also helps to really get that clear, that bright sound. And I think a lot of things are more critical. When you're doing the touch technique, you're more sensitive to the individual variations from guitar to guitar, and the slightest little things, like you could change the action so slightly that you can't even see the difference, and yet it'll make all the difference in the world when you go to play it. And sometimes that messes me up because I don't realize that my action might be a little too high, and I'm just blaming myself. Why can't I play today, you know? And then I'll lower the action down a little bit, that little microscopic couple thousandths, and suddenly I can play, you know? So I find I'm more sensitive. With the pick, I find that I'm less sensitive to those kind of differences, definitely. And let's see what else. I tune these two highest pitch strings up a half step higher than they would be in Spanish tuning. That's the first way I ever tuned a guitar. It made sense to me because the night that I first got a guitar, after begging my parents, you know, please get me a guitar, and it was Christmas Eve and I got my guitar, and I stayed up for 4 hours trying to learn how to play it. I got this little book, you know, Begin the Guitar, and it had Down in the Valley, and I was trying to play Down in the Valley, and it didn't sound, none of the chords sounded right. I was going like, you know, playing it like this. How would you play that? I was playing it like this. It was like, no, and I was, you know, 11 years old, and I was going crazy, you know. And I finally went back. See, what happened was the book told you how to tune your neck up relatively, starting with anywhere low where it kind of basically sounds good. And then you tune at the 5th fret, so you get those together, you get those together, and those together. And once I saw the pattern, I said, oh, okay. So I tuned the whole guitar up like that, all up in 4ths, and none of the chords were right. So then I finally went back and I, you know, read it in detail. And I said, what's wrong here? And I figured out, oh, okay, here you go under the 4th fret, okay. But I never really understood, well, why is that one different? It never really made sense to me. And finally, about 5 years later, when I was really intensely learning the neck, and it used to bug me so much that you had to change your fingering when you're playing a chord, same pitches, but just moving them to different strings, you have to change the physical fingering and the picture of how it looks. And so that used to bug me out. So I said, well, and I always remembered that 4th. So I said, well, let me go back to the 4th and check that out. So I went back to the 4th, and for a while, I was going back and forth between the two tunings, standard tuning and the 4th tuning. And after a while, it got confusing because they're so close. I don't really have enough cues that tell me which one I'm in. I'd forget, and I'd go to grab something from one tuning when I was in the other tuning. And so finally, I just said, well, okay, I'm going to have to make a decision here. Which tuning am I going to use? And this was after I'd been playing already for about 5.5 years. And I knew like chords and stuff all up and down the guitar, you know. And so I decided, well, okay, I'm going to go with the new tuning. And it took me about a month to get as good in the new tuning as I was in the old tuning. The new tuning is great because, for example, check this chord out. You'd play this the same way in standard tuning because those 4 notes aren't any different, those 4 strings. But what about this? What if I play it on these strings? Same fingering. If I play it on these strings, same fingering. I don't have to learn 3 different ways to play it. So that's a 3-to-1 ratio. That's pretty significant. When you think about it, you're on a learning curve. It might take you more than 3 times as long to learn 3 times as much stuff. Who knows? Here's a chord that's 5 strings wide. Very beautiful 5-string wide chord. I can play it here the same way. The timbre is going to be different because it's on different strings. So it's good to be able to do stuff on different strings. See, anywhere I go, I just do this. It doesn't matter where it is. There's a 1-to-1 correspondence between the structure, physically and visually, and the pitch structure. So it's real easy. I can transpose it. It's all basically the same. And the symmetry of it also allowed me to do things like whole tones. You know, stuff like anything that's symmetrical. Anything that looks symmetrical is going to sound symmetrical, you know. have any further questions?
Yes, I have one. About your new technique that you developed, is your right hand actually tapping the notes or using some hammers and pull-offs?
Well, let's see. Maybe I should move to another guitar to demonstrate. This one's not really set up. Normally, when you play a guitar, you're using the left hand just to hold the string down, and the energy, the impact that makes the string vibrate is coming from your right hand. You might be plucking with your right hand, you might be plucking with a pick, you might be strumming, but basically the energy comes from here. So the concept of what I'm calling the touch technique is that you don't need two hands to play a note. You can get the note with one hand, so that the thing that selects the length of the string and the thing that energizes it to make it play are the same. Instead of having two different things, now you just have that one, and you can go with one hand and just play note with one hand. And it's the impact of the string hitting the fret, bam, that's like a hammer. And that's why I guess the idea of like hammer on. But see, some people when they say hammer on, they're talking about you've already picked the note, and then it's already down, and you go like that to a note that's already down. But you can also do that without having previously picked a note. So normally people have already used and incorporated hammer-ons into conventional guitar techniques. This has been going on for centuries. The difference is, I guess, that when you can crank up your volume a little bit, especially on electric, and use that approach exclusively, or use that as your primary technique, then we're really talking about another approach to playing the instrument. I can play with one hand. And I can play with the other hand. And I can play with both hands. Now see there, that's a slide. Now that's a conventional technique. I could have done a slide that way, but instead I'm just doing a tap and a slide. Now there are different ways of coordinating the hands. Physically, I think it's pretty well known, you know, how to play a guitar with one hand. But when you get into the coordination between the two hands, that's the stuff that some people find a little bit difficult to grasp. You know, I've had people come to me and they say, you know, I'm a guitar player, and you know that stuff you do, you know, with the two hands and all the counterpoints and stuff? I say, yeah, you know. Well, I just wanted you to know I'm not going to do it. And I say, well, why not? You know, you should check it out. I mean, it's fun, and it opens up all these possibilities. No way, I'm not going to do it. You know, and I can't talk them into it. They don't even want to try it, you know. So I think there is a little bit of kind of like fear and trepidation sometimes getting into it. But once you get into it, and a lot of it has to do with just setting up the instrument so that it's comfortable. And, you know, I spend a lot of time dealing with that and figuring out what works for me. And then there's other instruments, like, for example, there's the stick, and there's some of the various guitars that are out where they've kind of done that sort of work for you. And I'm hoping to maybe save people some time by talking about this, you know, and maybe you can learn it faster than I did. But basically, the coordination of the two hands, that's the part that's really, that's where the magic really happens. One of the first things I did, I remember, because I was playing a lot of piano, and I patterned my first exercises for two-hand guitar after piano exercises. For example, I was playing a lot of the hand-in exercises where you do stuff like... Okay, there's a couple of mistakes in that too, but if you know where the mistakes are, and you remember, okay, I did it right, except I did this mistake and I did that mistake. Even that is a little better than just sort of playing stuff. You know, during lunch we were talking about this. You know, the whole idea of making the most efficient use of your practice time. What I try to do is I try to minimize mistakes when I'm practicing. See, right now, you know, because of this format, and I'm kind of sort of in a hurry, and I'm going to go through this really fast. But normally, if I was just practicing, I wouldn't have played that fast. I would have played it at a speed where I probably would not have made those mistakes. That's normally what I do. If you knew how I really practice when I'm just alone, just practicing, it's ridiculous. It's even stupid how I play. I play so simple. And one of the reasons I do that is because I want to minimize mistakes. I don't want to know what it's like to make a mistake. Because what happens is you can learn your mistakes. I believe that on some level, every experience you have in life gets stored somewhere in there, and it's going to jump out at you when you don't want it. For example, if I make a mistake, I don't know about you guys here, but when I make a mistake, I feel a little stress, you know, from making the mistake. And so what happens is every mistake that I make, the stress gets higher and higher. My learning potential goes lower and lower. And eventually what's going to happen is I'm going to learn all these mistakes, and there's an association in your mind, mistake, stress, mistake, stress. So then if I get on stage, if I'm at all stressed, then my mind is going to remember stress, mistake, and I'm going to make all the mistakes. And every way that I know how to mess it up, I'm going to do. So what I try to do is I try to minimize mistakes when I'm practicing, and the way that I do that is I simplify and I slow stuff down. So anyway, we can get back to that a little bit later, but basically I was talking about the kind of exercises that I was doing. Let me slow it down to a level that I feel real comfortable. And basically the idea is that with the hand-in exercises, you're playing, at least in the beginning, the first half of the book, you're playing everything in octaves. And I did a lot of my first exercises in octaves, so here's some more octaves. See, I departed from the octaves, I went into a tenth there, and then I come back into octaves. And see, now if I was just doing a concert, I might have gone with that. I split them off into a tenth, and I might go and play tenths for a while. I might go. I might do something like that, or I might remember that I'm still just practicing. So if I go off from where I was, I should go back to it and stay with that until I feel real solid with that, and then I can move on and I can do tenths or something like that. If practicing and doing are too different, then you're going to have a problem, because then you're going to do all this stuff when you're practicing, and it's not going to carry over to the performance. You know, it's like, you know, gee, it worked at home, why doesn't it work, you know? And that still happens to me. I get in front of an audience, and all the stuff I worked on at home, it doesn't come out. Why is that? You know, what's the difference? How does my mind know that this is time to get it wrong? When I was at home, I got it right. And so I started getting into those differences, and there's a lot of things. It's very subtle. For example, let's suppose that you do all your practicing in the morning. That's the only time you can practice. But you do all your gigs at night. Well, there's going to be a difference. It's a different time of day. Whereas if you practice at the same time that you perform, there's going to be more carryover of what you learn in practice is going to carry over. So what I realized is, like, I want to make practicing different only in the respect that it makes it easy for me to get stuff together. But I don't want to make it so different that there's no carryover from practicing to doing. So how can I make them more similar? And I started thinking about things like for example, pretending that I'm performing. You know, even if I'm alone, I pretend. I get the feeling like I imagine that there's people out there. Maybe I'll even put pictures up of an audience, and I'll play to the audience. I'll look at different people, and I'll play to those people. You know, stuff like that to to remind me, okay, I'm doing this for a performance. Sometimes the only difference between practicing and performing is, let's take the audience away. That part's messing me up. It's making me nervous. Okay, do the same thing without an audience. Well, the point I'm making is that practicing is a goal-oriented thing. You do it for a purpose, and when you've achieved the purpose, you go back to doing. You don't want to get lost in practicing, but at the same time, it is good to separate a little bit. So what I started to do is I started to think, okay, how can you combine things in such a way that, like for example, certain things might be easier to combine than others, you know, and there's analogies to food, like when you get into food combinations. Certain foods are easier to combine than others. It's the same thing with music or practicing different kinds of music. Like, for example, something that has to do with a lot of harmony. and I'm learning a lot of chord voicings. And those chord voicings, I'm memorizing the sounds, but I'm also memorizing visually how they look on the neck. So my visual thing is really involved in learning these different patterns on the neck. So I better use my visual system. I better concentrate on the task that my visual system is dealing with, learning these chords. So if I try to learn something else that also requires a heavy use of my visual, then I'm going to have interference and I'm not going to learn so much. But I can combine that with something else where I don't need my visual so much. Like, for example, if I'm working on my sense of time, it's basically a groove thing. And I can concentrate on feeling for that. So while I'm working on chord voicings, I can work on my chord voicings and I can combine that with working on grooves, because those two are compatible. I can combine that without interference. Whereas if I was working on my chord voicings and I could try to combine that with something that it wasn't compatible, where I had the visual thing, sometimes it's weird, because sometimes when the things are too close, you get more interference. Isn't that strange how that works? Like, for example, in harmony, when I play these two notes, let's see. Yeah, this is as close as you can get in the chromatic scale. It's a half step, but it's dissonant, you know. That's interesting, that the closer you get, sometimes the more interference you get. So sometimes by doing completely different things, sometimes when I'm playing with two hands, I might be, the music might be so complicated that it's beyond the level of what I can completely hear. I'm still working on my hearing, I'm still developing it. I don't want to let that stop me from playing what I want to play. So what I might do is I might concentrate with one hand, and I'm listening to what I want to hear, and I'm playing what I want that hand to play. And then with the other hand, I might not be thinking so much by sound, I might be thinking more like of how it looks or how it feels, because that's just the accompaniment anyway. And so, you know, it's going to tend to play stereotyped patterns or regular recurring patterns. And so, you know, I don't have to hear everything it does. If it makes a mistake, I might have to jump and correct it. But for the most part, I can be thinking like auditory with one hand and visual or kinesthetic with the other hand, and that keeps the two things separate. It's interesting, because I don't think we're going to have enough time to really get into this, but I wanted to briefly mention that it relates to food. Like, you know, I was talking about things that combine better than other things, and it's the same thing with food. And incidentally, because it's all related, I've definitely found that what you eat affects how you play. If you eat healthy food, you're going to play better. It's just, I've done the experiment on myself. That whole romantic thing about, you know, the starving artist and stuff, don't buy it. It doesn't work. If you're feeling good and you're well nourished, you're going to play better. You know, it's just the way it works. In terms of this, in terms of the two hands and developing counterpoint, you know, I can show you basic techniques, but really it's in here. It's really in, you know, the whole thing about how do you coordinate the two hands. It's really more in like, well, people ask me all the time, they say, what do? Do you split your brain? How do you do all these different things at the same time? And I say, well, one of the things that I do is I figure out ways of thinking of those things not as two things, but thinking of them as one thing. And that's where the study of music theory really can come to your rescue, because it gives you other ways of understanding the same material. So like a lot of times, I might be going like, let's see, let me turn this on. So I go like, now see here, yeah, I got two hands and they're kind of doing different things. But to me, in my mind, this is one chord. I'm going like this. But I might be like mixing the notes up a little bit, kind of stirring them up like a soup, but it's still this one chord. And if I go from this to this, yeah, this is another chord, that's true. But it's really just a cyclic permutation of the same notes. If you don't believe me, check it out. And I go up to here, it's the same. And I go here. So I can play these four chords. Okay, it's four different voicings, but it's four different voicings of the same four-note pitch glass set. So in my mind, those four go together. It's one thing. And once I step in there, I'm in that thing. And I can go all around it because I know it. I might find myself in another one. Then I'm back to this one. And I think this stuff is just so beautiful. I love that kind of stuff. But it's only because I've, you know, gone through it and I've checked it out, you know, step by step, that it's easy for me to just go back into it and play it musically, you know. I remember a time when I was taking all these things and I was arpeggiating them like crazy. Like I was going like, or I can go, or, all those different things. And I got on the gig that night, and what did I do? I went, you know, I mean, regardless of what the music was around me, I was going, you know. And I got home that night, and I said, you know, I don't think I was really playing with those cats, you know. I was just basically repeating the stuff that I practiced. And I realized that I needed to do was I needed to slow it down and break it down. It's just like when you're eating food. You know, like say you have a 7-course meal, you don't like stuff it all in your mouth. You like eat a course and you check that out, you digest it a little bit and say, wow, that was good, you know. Kind of assimilate it. And then you go on to the next course, eat that, you know. So like I might play it like that. I might go. And then I remember how that sounded. I still have it echoing. It's like that sound I just played. It's in the room now. Can you hear it? Bouncing off the walls? Can you feel it? What did you feel from that? And you can still feel it now because I haven't gone on to something else. And here's another one. It's still there. And that's what I started to do. And that's when my learning started to go up. Because the ironic thing about it was that when I slowed down, I found that I was learning faster. You know, and it relates to food too, because when you eat something, a lot of people don't know this, but food doesn't do you any good when it's in your stomach. You know, digestion, you know, you're breaking it down, but it's the assimilation. That's when the food starts to do you some good. Digestion requires energy. It's when it gets past that point and it's at the point of assimilation, that's when it gives you energy. And so you have to let it get to that point. Whereas here, when I kept going on to the other thing, I wasn't giving it a chance to do that. You know how like on the radio they segue into like one song isn't even done and they segue into another thing, you know? And so it's almost like, well, we went through all this trouble to give you this whole experience, but it wasn't worth nothing. Let's go on to something else, you know? And that's kind of almost an insult, you know? I remember one of my theory courses at Princeton was really wonderful with studying theory with Jim Randall. And he did this thing. In a way, it was very similar to other theory courses that we had. Because, you know, it was similar format, you know, standard thing. Like, you know, professor plays, you know, a record or tape, and then everybody talks about it. And they play something else, and everybody talks about it. But he said, okay, this time it's going to be different. What I want to do is I want to have 3 minutes of silence every time the music stops. And I mean a full 3 minutes. Nobody say anything. And the way he put it was he said, wherever that music put you, hang out there for 3 minutes. Then we can talk. And it was really interesting because I really felt like when we started doing that, I really felt like I finally heard the music. It was like a whole different thing. And everybody in the class, I think, would tell you that it was a whole different thing. The questions were so much better. We felt like we really understood the music much better because we weren't sitting there thinking, well, I'm going to be clever and what can I say, you know, when the song is over. No, we just listened. And we had so much more insightful comments after that. You know, and like I find, like I can take something like this, and because I don't have a zillion other ideas that follow that, then it forces me to check this out. Wow. What does that suggest? What would follow that? See, after I play something like that, I don't have to play anything per se. That was a whole statement. Let me just wait and check that out. Where did that put us, you know? I can still hear that high part. I like that high part. Let me go back to that high part. Theme and variations. Play it over and over again, but a little different each time. How about octave transposition? And suddenly I realize that I'm playing a blues. So I'm going to go with that. And I have a... Sometimes when you play something like particularly complicated or particularly fast, then you need to pause longer after that. And when you don't, when you keep on going, that's when you start to mess up. And that's when you start to get ahead of yourself. That's when you start to make mistakes and learn your mistakes. And what happens is the perspective of the musician is different from the perspective of the audience. Because the musician is going to be like playing something like that and also thinking of all the variations that might come after that, or maybe won't, or maybe should. The musician has all this other stuff, and sometimes that can be dangerous because that prevents you from hearing what you just played. And maybe if you really, really heard what you just played, then you'll know where to go next. I got a little tension. Deep breath, relax. I was glad I relaxed because I got a good idea off that. Now I hear something else. It's good to sing too. And you don't have to keep the tempo up. You can stop. If you're not sure, just stop and hang out. Sometimes when I'm practicing something specific, like let's say I'm doing a specific thing that has a specific way to play it, for example, a Bach two-part invention. Now it goes on from there, but I'm going to stop there and take a deep breath and just relax a little bit. Think about what I liked about that, what I didn't like about that. If I don't, then it's going to kind of get cast into the twilight zone in my mind. Now I can sort of separate the wheat from the chaff. I remember the good parts. I thought there were some good dynamics in there, but I thought the dynamics could have been a little better. Let me go back to the beginning and see if I can get a little better on the dynamics. Yeah, it's a little better. Dynamics were a little hipper that time. I'm totally into dynamics. Dynamics, that's my whole thing. Listen to this. Dynamics, man, that's so much of the art, man. Dynamics, when the dynamics are right, it makes me cry sometimes, you know? Articulation is another one. Articulation and dynamics go hand in hand. Check out all the ways I could articulate this. There's a thing we call legato, where I can go, and there's a lot of ways of playing legato, but I'm going to do a real basic sort of garden variety legato approach. Which wasn't even as legato as it could be, but that's basically legato. Then we have this other thing that we call staccato. That's the kind of stuff I play when I'm practicing. Real simple stuff, but I try to get every note just right. Well, what about everything in between? You know, I mean, there's legato here and staccato here, but we don't have degrees of that, you know? And that's what I'm working on now, is getting the degrees in between. So I developed this thing, I just want to tell you about it really briefly. It's just kind of something I did for fun the other day, but I have this MIDI software, which I developed on my computer, and what I did is I played some stuff from the guitar, and I played it into it, and I had it measure my articulation, like each note. How long did that note last before, you know, basically the duration of the note. What percentage is that of the time to the next note? And actually expressed it in a decimal, like from 0 to 10. So basically then I would play something and the computer would basically tell me, okay, was that a 0.5? I mean, or let's say 5 if you're going from 0 to 10. And so 5 would be like this. The release would be right in the middle. So you have so 5 was already sounding kind of staccato, you know. I'm still working on these, but I'll basically kind of show you. 7 might be more like this. Or like 3 might be. So in other words, you have all these different gradations. And one of the things that I do when I'm practicing is I do a similar sort of thing with dynamics, because we already have the words for that anyway. Like we have words like mezzo forte, or mezzo piano, or piano. Forte. So basically what I'll do is I'll go from different dynamic levels and I'll, you know, challenge myself and see if I can jump around and precisely go to a dynamic. It's like when you have your bicycle and you shift the gear and you go from like the 7th gear and you jump up to 10th gear, you know, and you got to go right to that gear. Sometimes the chain doesn't quite make it there, and you got to like sort of fudge it until it goes right into gear. That's the same kind of thing with dynamics. So anyway, I'm learning how to do that.
Do you adapt your guitar to your playing, or
You're talking about physically changing the guitar to make it
yes,
easier?
you adapt your frets and pickups and things like that? to
Yeah,
your-
most
because
guitars need to be adjusted, not necessarily modified, but adjusted. For example, like good fret work, like I was saying earlier, on almost every guitar I've ever tried for the touch technique, it needed to be adjusted, like usually fret work. Some guitars, like I remember my Travis Bean was the first guitar I ever played where I could take it right off the shelf and basically just lower the action and start to do the touch technique. Up until then, it was always, well, this guitar I think would be nice, but I'd have to do some work on it to check it out. Next.
Yes. I'd like you to tell us something that you are thinking when you're playing. What comes from your mind?
What comes into my mind? Well, I'm thinking on a lot of levels, and I don't always remember what I was thinking when I was playing. I know that when I'm practicing, that's my chance to kind of